Well, hi, Barry. I got Barry Irwin on my podcast today. And Barry, to let you know what the podcast series is, it's actually called Nova Legends, Nova as in Northern Virginia. And I started a local sports podcast during the lockdown. And for the last year or so, I've been interviewing some of the best sports stars from Northern Virginia. And I've gotten some buy-in from some of the great stars from our area, such as Grant Hill, Tommy Amaker, and former U.S. women's soccer coach Jill Ellis. But you know, we were talking last week with our mutual friend Fred Heyman, who's a horse owner in Maryland. And as soon as we started talking, I'm like, man, if I ever had to do a horse racing podcast, I would love to do it with Barry Irwin. So this is the first podcast on horse racing I've done. I'm very glad that you joined me today.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So I first saw you on TV. I would say come in contact, but I was probably far away from you at that Preakness, but we were never in contact. But it was during the 1997 Triple Crown Series, and you had Captain Bodgit, a local horse, a hard-knocking horse, would keep trying, ridden by Alex Solis, and it was trained by a local guy named Gary Capuano, a guy that I knew well, really well-liked, honest horseman from Maryland. And Captain Bodgit did really well, and you did something I thought was great. You kept him with Gary Capuano. Oftentimes, these big horses, as soon as they show any amount of ability, they go to the big trainers like the Todd Pletchers or at the time D. Wayne Lucases. But you kept him with Gary, and you had great luck. He didn't win one of those Triple Crown races, which you would eventually do, but he really handled himself very well. So first, I'd like to talk about how you got involved in horse racing in the first place, and maybe a little bit about your background.
Okay, so I grew up Southern California in West Los Angeles. I was always crazy about horses when I was a kid. I was a big Hopalong Cassidy fan, big Roy Rogers fan. I used to get my grandmother and grandfather to take me anywhere that Hopalong Cassidy would appear, and he would hand out little coins, which they call hoppy money. So they would take me there, and then I would make them drive over this big hill into the San Fernando Valley, where they had a lot of horse farms, several of which were owned by movie stars and producers and directors. And I go out of the car and I go up to the rail and the fence, and I'd make horse sounds and get them to come over to me, pet them, feed them treats. And I used to have them take me to a thing we called Ponyland, ride the horses. And so that's how horse crazy I was. And then my dad, he used to run hurdles in high school and college, and he was a major track and field fan after that. And he got my brother and I both interested. We both competed in the high jump and hurdles at high school and university. And while this was all going on, I still followed horse racing. I started watching it on TV when I was just 7 or 8 years old. I used to watch Native Dancer, a Maryland horse. When I was 12, Swaps was a big deal for me. I used to go out and watch him. And it was, I got hooked. To me, it was just always a race, either a track race or a horse race.
Yeah, and so you got hooked on it, but as you know, it's not easy to go from watching the horse race and betting the horses, and then as an owner, it's one of those things where it tends to be like a generational thing, or families are involved in owning horses. How did you go about actually getting involved in owning horses, and did you know, even as a young guy, that one day you wanted to do that?
No, I had an uncle that moved in. He was my grandfather's brother. He came from Russia, as did all of my family. And he was a hardworking guy. He built up a little small chain of 3 Jewish bakeries. And he started going to the races. And he couldn't read or write English. He couldn't read the racing form, but he got hooked. And he went through all of his money, came into ill health, and lived with us the last few months of his life. He gave me his binoculars before he died, and he told me everything he knew about racing, and that only served to whet my appetite. My parents just, they wondered why they let him in the house, because that was like the final hook in my mouth, you know? And I was just mostly interested in it from a betting standpoint. And I just liked the competition. It never occurred to me that I could own a horse. I wanted to be a fiction writer. I wanted to write the next Catcher in the Rye. That was my dream.
Well, but then one day you did become a horse owner. So how did that happen? And I think I remember reading somewhere, maybe he was hearing from you, that you'd met Jeff Siegel, who was a really good handicapper, and I know he owned a lot of horses in California. Was he involved in you actually owning your first horse?
A little bit. I was a short story writer, and I was working on a novel, and I was in my early 20s, and a woman that taught a class that I took at UCLA thought I was the next coming, and she bought my 4 or 5 best stories. I had a story at the New Yorker for 9 months before they rejected it. And I had a couple other promising leads, you know, to have a couple of my stories published. And the issue that my first story was supposed to appear in this literary magazine that my professor ran, they ran out of money. They lost their angel and they folded. And it was so upsetting to me that I was working on a novel anyway, kind of like The Catcher in the Rye, kid goes to the racetrack. And I told my wife, I said, I'm just fed up with this whole scene. And I got in my car and I drove to Kentucky just to see what it was like and see if my book made any sense. And when I got back there, the first place I went into was a trade magazine named The Blood Horse. And I went in to ask for a map of the farm so I could go, you know, just check places out. And he took a liking to me, asked me what I did. I told him. He introduced me to the editor, who I didn't know him, obviously, but I'd read all of his stories for the previous 4 or 5 years. And he interviewed me, also took a liking to me and offered me a job. At that point, I was working in the probation department and I was making $400 a week, which back in the mid 60s was a nice living in Southern California. He offered me 100. And I had a wife and a kid, and we didn't have any savings or anything. But I wanted the job, and her father was a writer, and she wanted to support me, and she indulged me, and we moved back to Kentucky. After being there about a year, we missed home. So we went home, and after that, I got various jobs. I became the editor of the local California State breeding and racing magazine. I wrote a column for the Racing Forum for 5 years. I had my own radio and television show in Southern California. I wrote for probably 30 or 35 international publications, but it never occurred to me that I could own a horse. And then Jeff Siegel, who I knew very well, met him up in the press box. He's probably 8 years younger than I am. He bought a horse with a couple of friends and I won a race or two. And so that's what turned the light bulb on in my mind. And the first 2 horses I bought, one I bought privately and another one we claimed. Those 2 horses, in a matter of like 2 weeks at Del Mar, won 3 races. And a lot of people thought I had the golden touch. They wanted to do business with me. I was fed up working at the Racing Forum because the Racing Forum in those days wouldn't tackle any controversial issues at all. It's a bit of a shit kicker, to use the phrase. I just had enough. And I opened up my own bloodstock agency, did that for about 8 or 9 years. And then after that, I decided to start this company of syndicating thoroughbred racehorses on a fractional interest basis.
So maybe you can explain more about the structure of the fractional ownership, and also compare Team Valor's structure to some of the other ones that you may see, like the Eclipses or the West Points, or even the My Racehorse. I mean, what is your structure compared to some of the other type of partnership vehicles that you hear about in horse racing?
Okay. I think most of them, except for the My Racehorses, were pretty much the same. guy named Cott Campbell, who lived in Aiken, South Carolina. He basically got the ball rolling in the 60s. And the whole concept is based on spreading risk and spreading the cost of expenses. So instead of somebody owning all of a horse or half of a horse or a quarter of a horse, he offered interest of 5%, 10%. And so this allowed for a larger pool of partners to own a single horse. And by doing it that way, instead of somebody having to pay $60,000 a year to have a horse in training, they would either have to pay $3,000 or $6,000. So it became very affordable. So our partnership, basically, we do 5 and 10%. We do occasional 2.5% interest. Everybody shares on a pro rata basis all the costs, whatever they are: training, veterinary, shoeing, vanning, like that. And what we do is we collect money once every other month for expenses. And then as horses earn money, that money goes out the door with a winner circle package, a picture and a videotape and the chart about a week to 10 days after each race. And that's basically the structure.
Well, one thing I've noticed about your horses and your partnership is you guys do a lot of running overseas. What led you to race more of Team Valor's horses in Europe? And and what are your holdings in America? Do you still run horses in America as well?
Yes, I've always been internationally minded, whether it was racehorses or track and field. I love the Olympics. I love the whole international track and field tour, the Diamond League, and racing. It's the same way. I just think it's more varied. It's more interesting to me, and it's more of a challenge. And racing overseas is a lot more prestigious than it is in the United States. From the time I started, even before I did Team Valor, as a bloodstock agent, I bought horses for various trainers around the country. I was the first guy that brought Bobby Frankel to France. We bought 5 or 6 horses. They came over here and did well. And I think the first horse I bought in Ireland was in the late 70s. And I've raced horses over there either individually or in partnership for the last 35, 40 years. But the last couple of years, I don't like the way racing is being conducted in this country. There's too much cheating with performance enhancing drugs. I'm at the forefront of a group of people that were responsible for helping to pass the recent legislation last year that went through the Congress and the Senate. And, we were pushing for investigations that eventually led to Jason Service and Jorge Navarro getting in trouble, as well as this guy, Seth Fishman, who was just found guilty last week, of selling adulterated drugs. And so I don't like the way it's going here. And I'm hopeful it will get better and that we can right the ship. But in the meantime, I've shifted a lot of the base of my operations to Europe to such an extent that we now have more horses racing in Europe than we do in the United States. And I think it'll grow bigger in Europe in the next year or two. And I'll have less of a footprint in America until things get straightened out. I think in 3 years, we'll know one way or another if racing is going to make it here or not. And if not, I have hedged my bet and I'm focusing on racing in Europe.
Well, Barry, how come there's not doping overseas? I mean, if they can get away with it in America, why can't they get away with it in France and England and the other jurisdictions?
Well, they do have a little bit of a problem over there, but it's not anywhere near as pervasive as it is here. I was on a podcast with a guy named Nick Luck last spring, an English guy. He also does the Breeders' Cup telecasts here. And he said, just like you said, why are you racing over there? so much? Is it because of cheating? And I said, yeah, exactly. And he said, well, do you think there's cheating over here? And I said, yes, and it surprised him. And he said, really? I said, yeah. He says, like where? I said, well, France. He says, can you be more explicit? I said, I've identified 4 trainers by the patterns of their horses racing and their success. There are 4 guys that are out and out cheating. They're doing things that just cannot be done on a regular basis. He said, can you name them? I said, no, I don't want to get sued. So he chose over, he said, can you tell me? So I named the guys. Since then, all 4 of those guys have been arrested and are either in jail or it looks like they will soon be heading to jail. So it happens over there, but those guys, the authorities over there, they're serious about it. They want to clean it up. They have the will to do it. In America, there's hardly a racing jurisdiction that wants to catch the bad guys here. They think they need them because they want their horses to race and create larger field size. Here, it's all about business. In Europe, it's mostly a sport. It is a business too, but it's a different culture there. Those people, they're sportsmen. They want to do the right thing. And in America, it's win at all costs, and the dollar is the bottom line.
I was reading last week where Mohammed Mubrik is back in America, and one reason he cited for coming back is the purses here are just so much bigger, and the purses in Europe weren't great. How do you deal with that? I mean, you're buying horses for a lot of money, and you're racing in Europe. How are you able to make ends meet with the purse structure the way it is in Europe?
Well, if you're racing horses at a high enough end, the purses are just fine. That's number one. And I've never focused on what I call prize money or purses. I've focused on asset appreciation. Buy something for $1, sell it for $3 or $4. You can make much more money doing it that way than you can relying on purses.
Right. Well, great. So when you're looking to give your horse to a trainer, what do you look for in a trainer, and what kind of process do you go through to pick a trainer for your horses?
Well, what I usually do, whether it's domestically or internationally, is the same thing I did with Gary Capuano and Captain Bodgit. If a trainer is doing well with the horse and he got it to a point that it's performing up to what I consider to be a high enough level, and the guy has a good reputation, I will invariably leave the horse with that trainer.
Mm-hmm.
There's some holes in the operation, or I don't know enough about the guy, or I've heard some things that I don't like, then I will look to move it to a different trainer. And in each locale where we race, I've developed relationships with a few different trainers that I trust. I mean, I've had so many trainers over the years and gone through a lot of them, and I'm down to the group that I trust and like. And amongst those, I know what the strengths of each trainer is, and I will pair up the horses accordingly.
Well, and also, what do you look for in an investor? Now, I know partnerships of any kind can be tough. You got to share values with partners. Partners have to understand the business. They have to be able to accept risk, and they have to be patient. So, how do you go about finding your investors?
Well, I've tried everything under the sun: advertising, seminars, referral, word of mouth, paying agents, whatever. And what I've learned is, if we have a website, if people jump through enough hoops to find me, because I don't advertise, they need to figure out where I am, how to get a hold of me. And, once they do that and I speak to them, I can pretty much size them up and feel good about them. We don't like advertising because the kind of people that you get invariably aren't the kind that you want. We have found through the years that the best people, this will surprise you, lawyers are the best. And the reason that lawyers make the best clients is they've seen it all. Every day of their life, they buck up against things that we would never see. And in order to be a successful horse owner and enjoy it, you've got to be able to roll with the punches, because every day could bring you three bad things. That's the nature of it. We have a lot of accountants, engineers, mathematicians, people that like the complexity of the challenge. One group that we shy away from are doctors. We've had too many bad situations with doctors. A lot of them feel like they're entitled. When they lose, they're looking to place blame.
Malpractice.
Yeah. So we've had a client base. It's hardly changed in 25 years, of about 250 partners. All of them own at least one horse. Most of our people buy a couple of interests a year. We have a couple of guys that buy an interest in every single horse we offer. They basically have created their own mutual fund. So if we buy 15 horses a year and they buy an interest in each one, they feel as though they're covered. We have one guy right now who's one of our top 3 partners in terms of investment. And last year he skipped one horse, and he thought it was just too low level of a horse that didn't have much upside. And that's the best horse we have now. So he's kicking himself. And I think he'll just buy every horse going forward now, just as a matter of insurance.
Now, do your partners have any say? And so, like, for example, if you're a 10, 20% partner and a decision has to be made whether or not to sell a horse or maybe even drop a horse into a claiming race, which I don't think you guys do a lot of that. Do the partners have any kind of say in how the horse is managed?
So the first horse we bought was a horse named Political Ambition, which I bought from Brereton Jones, who was then launching a campaign to become the governor of Kentucky. And he already named it. It was a 3-year-old, and was our first horse, and we had trouble syndicating it. And the guy came along and wanted to buy 25%, and I was reluctant to do it. But Jeff Siegel, who was my partner, he's been my partner for many years until a few years ago, he said, let's just take the money. We need it, and sure enough, that guy was a complete royal pain. And ever since then, we don't let anybody own more than 10%. And the reason is, if you own more than 10%, you're going to want to have some say-so or more say-so than somebody that owns 5%. Your ego is going to get the best of you. So if people own 5 and 10%, everybody's on the same level. They're on an even keel. I talk to the partners all the time. I communicate with them, but I do make most of the decisions when it comes to the jockey, where we're going to race the horse. Times that we take votes are anytime there's a financial consideration. So if we're going to supplement a horse to a race, if we're going to ship a horse to a race at a long distance, or if we're going to drop a horse in a claiming race, or if we're going to sell it, all of those we conduct votes, but we don't conduct votes on just average, everyday, day-to-day stuff.
Oh, that's great. So how important is the on-track experience? So I had a friend who loved to own with West Point. And one of the reasons why, even though oftentimes he didn't do great money-wise, if they had a horse running in the Maryland tracks, he'd be able to go in the paddock and pal around, even if he didn't necessarily have ownership of this particular horse. So he kind of liked being involved. How important is the on-track experience, especially if you have horses that are going to run overseas and your investors are here in America?
Obviously, if you can go to the track, it's a hell of a lot more fun than watching a race on television or a monitor. But during the last 2 years, because of COVID, most instances people were forced to watch the races on a monitor. And it's actually the best thing that ever happened to my business, because we're racing a lot of horses overseas that people would normally be unable to see in person, so they can watch it on the monitor. So the last couple of years, we've picked up several new clients. We've raised more money each year than we had in the previous few years. And so it turned out to be a benefit for us. But, I've had guys, especially in New York when we used to race there a lot, that would only buy a horse if it was going to be stable at Belmont Park, and if it would be running at either Aqueduct or Belmont, because they could hop in their car or be driven there in 45 minutes. And without exaggeration, 9 out of 10 times the horses ran, those guys never showed up anyway, but they wanted the option able to do it. When we started out, we had a lot of what I would call carrot feeders, guys that would come out either themselves or with their family or their girlfriend, come out on weekends in the morning and feed their horses, especially at Saratoga. Nowadays, most of the people we have don't do that. I mean, some of them will show up, but they love coming on race day. We don't. You mentioned the guy that got to go to the paddock and pal around. Well, horses run. Unless you own that horse, we don't want you doing that, because the people that buy the horse have paid a lot of money and put a lot of money into it, and they're the ones that deserve the focus. And if there's a whole bunch of hangers on, there kind of dilutes from their experience. So when we run a horse, it's the people that own it that get the perks. It's just like being on an airplane. You have first class, business class, coach, and then that's it. That's exactly how we run our stable.
Yeah. So, what about the horses that you buy? What kind of horses are you looking to buy privately? Do you generally buy from sales and like auctions? And at what stage? How old are they? Or are you looking for horses that are in training that they've already raced and won?
Okay, so my business model has not changed since the first horse we bought. Okay, my business model, we don't like buying unraced horses. We used to buy unraced horses. We even used to claim a few, but it's just too risky. You have no idea anymore what anybody's doing with a horse or to a horse. So unless I can have my team of veterinarians go in there and thoroughly vet the horse, I'm not buying it. It's just like in the NFL. That's why they have the combine. You want to see them, then you want to have a doctor go over them. And that's exactly what I want to do. So what I look for untapped potential. My gig is we have scouts all over the world, plus I watch races all the time. We look for a horse that's to open the package up just enough that we can see what we're looking for. So it's usually a horse that's run 1 or 2 times. We buy a lot of first-time winners, and we hope they've got potential, and we want to grab a hold of these horses at the very start of their career so that we can make sure to do the right thing. If you go to a 2-year-old sale, even though they're unraced, they're hard used in order to get fast works in, and most of them are compromised by the time you get them, and you wind up having to pay a huge premium for them. I don't care for those kind of venues. If you buy a mature horse at auction, there's either something wrong with it, or the competition to buy it is going to be so fierce, you're going to pay a tremendous premium for it. And I'm a value buyer. I want a horse that has talent, that has a good disposition, and looks the part. The rest of it, the pedigree, that kind of stuff, I don't pay that much attention to, because I'm looking to buy pure athletes.
Do you prefer to buy a male or female?
Well, if it was me with my own investment capital, I would never buy a male. Mm-hmm. It's too risky. The number of, you have to earn your money on the track with a horse in order to recoup your investment, because very few horses are good enough and have the qualities of pedigree, conformation, and temperament to go to stud. The only way you can make money with a male racehorse is to race it to a point where it's near its peak and then sell it. And most partners they won't let go of a horse like that, a male horse. With female horses, it's different. If you, the closer to fruition a female is, the less risk there is. So if you buy a filly that already won a stakes race, unless you overpaid for it, you're going to at least get your money back or make a profit. If you buy a horse that's run, a filly that's run 1 or 2 times, and you haven't overpaid for it, and she wins the stakes, you're going to double or triple your money. If you buy a filly that gets hurt the first time you race her, she's still going to have some residual value because she's a breeding animal. If that happens with a colt, it's like an oil well. You're either going to hit a gusher or you're going to hit a dry hole. And if you're trying to spread your risk, which is the whole reason to do partnerships anyway, that's something you have to be aware of.
And when you're buying horses and running in Europe, is it tricky because of the surfaces? They have a lot of synthetic surfaces now and turf. Is it different types of horses that you're looking for to run in Europe because of the surface, different types of surfaces in Europe?
No, not really. No. First of all, most horses that run on synthetic can transfer their form to the turf and vice versa. It's horses that go from synthetic or turf to dirt where there's a greater variance. When I started out, I was crazy about speed. I just thought speed was the greatest, and I thought sprinters were great. And then as I've grown older and more mature and seen more things, I've gone just the opposite now. We have a stable that is heavy in horses that stay. And when I say stay, I mean run 1.75 miles, 2 miles. We've had a couple of champions overseas doing that. And it's just, those horses stay sounder, they last longer, they're more fun, they run for the same kind of money. So most of the horses we have in Europe, we want a horse at minimum of 10 furlongs up to 2.5 miles, like the Ascot Gold Cup's 2.5 miles. We haven't won that, but we've placed it a couple of times. In America, you're looking for horses that can go 2 turns, run a mile, 1.16 miles, hopefully a little farther, but most of the racing in America is a mile, 1.16 miles. In Europe, the races that we like to shoot for are 1.25 miles would be like the minimum distance.
Do you have any particular handicapping tips for people, for horses that are changing barns, things to look for? I know you probably are, when you're owning horses at that level, maybe wager might be kind of boring to you, but for those who'd like to bet that the barn changes, do you have any particular tips?
Well, you're talking about in Europe or in America?
Or either, or both.
Okay. In Europe, you don't have what I call magic men. You take one horse from one guy, give it to another, and see a dramatic form reversal. It's just extremely rare. Okay. And most horses over there that change hands, that are bought and sold, stay with the trainer. The trainer is very powerful over there. You have a tough time buying a horse unless the trainer approves. In America, you want to buy a horse, you go to the owner. The trainer's usually not involved, but in Europe, just the opposite. In America, there are, there's basically 2 kinds of trainers now. There's guys that want to take an edge, and there's guys that want to play it straight. And then amongst the guys that play it straight, there's trainers that are extremely conservative. And if one of these aggressive guys takes a horse, like let's say a guy that you suspect is taking an edge, buys a horse off a straight shooter like Graham Motion or Bill Mott, you're going to want to bet that horse when they get it, because they're going to do things to it that the other guys wouldn't do.
Yeah, that's very sad. But I guess it could be a happy day if you cash a bet, but that's probably temporary. How about, Barry, what are some of your favorite overseas on-track experiences, racetrack experiences? I'm sure you've probably been to Ascot and Chantilly. What are some of your favorite overseas racing experiences?
Well, I think most people would agree that the most exciting thing over there is to either go to Royal Ascot as a fan, or if you're lucky enough to have a horse in a race there. It's a week-long meeting. It takes place at Ascot Racecourse. It's the Queen's meeting. She's there every day with the royal family. They have a royal procession that goes down the course, and everybody gets to see her. And then she'll be in the paddock for some of the races. So you're up close to the Queen. She owns her own horses. She does very well each year. But the pageantry of that place, just the physical layout, how everybody gets dressed up. They wear what they call a morning suit, which is a, top hat and tails, like over here, but longer. And it's incredible. The food is great. The people look good. The horses over there, when they're turned out and they go in the paddock there, they have what they call the pre-parade ring, and then the actual, the main one, paddock. The horses look fantastic, and there's a reason that they've called it the Sport of Kings, and it's a fabulous facility with great restaurants. There's unobstructed views for everybody, and just the sheer excitement. They have 6 races a day, and every one of them is a gem. I mean, it's just, I've gone there both as an owner and as a fan. I think I went for 22 or 23 years in a row without missing it. To me, that's the most fun over there. Another great meeting is the ARC meeting. It's a 2-day thing. It's at Longchamp, and it's where they run on the first Sunday of October every year, the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, and they have other races on the card. And that race course is just incredible. It's got a couple of undulations, but it's basically flat, and it's fair, and it's wide, and the courses are incredibly well maintained. They don't overuse their horses over there, either in training or in the races. Like when you train horses, either in Chantilly or Newmarket on the grass, nobody ever has to go over the same piece of ground more than once during the year. There's nothing like that in the United States. In the United States, it's all about keeping your horse sound. Over there, it's getting the most out of your horse, because they can really train those horses. When we bring horses from Europe to the United States, we figure they have a 5-pound edge over every other horse. That first time that you run a horse off the plane in America, it might run the best race of its life. It's like when I used to be a turf rider, I noticed when I was at Del Mar, a couple of horses would come from Centennial Park, a mile high, and up in the Denver area, Colorado, Pikes Peak, all that. And those horses would come down, and the first time they'd run their eyeballs out. And then the second time they'd run pretty good. And then after that, they were just like every other horse. So if you bring a horse over from Europe, they're so dead fit, they have a huge edge over our horses. But then after they've been here a while, they're just like the rest of them, because you can't train them hard enough to get them fit.
Wow. Well, do you sponsor trips for your partners to go over there to get the racetrack experience, or do you recommend them? They're like companies that put together these trips, or you just basically go on the internet and book your own experience? What do you recommend to your partners and other?
My first trip to Europe was in the 70s, and I got a free trip over there to publicize the venture of the guy that sponsored the trip over there. And it was a bunch of horse people. I became great friends with a bunch of them. I still know them today. It actually formed the nucleus for my first business ventures. And so there were about 35 people from Southern California, Arizona, and Texas that went over to Europe for 2 weeks. We went to England, Ireland, and France. We got to go to racetracks, farms, auctions. It was fantastic. So a couple of years ago, I think it was 2019, the first year of the pandemic, we had, maybe it was 2020. So we were going to take 24 people. This girl that worked for me, she and I set it up. We made deposits all over the place. It's going to be a 2-week trip, England, Ireland, France, and it was going to be unbelievable. And then COVID hit, and we had to cancel the trip, and we lost about a third of our non-refundable deposits. So I kind of took the wind out of our sails, but as soon as we can get back over there, we're going to do 2 or 3 trips a year.
Okay, great. In terms of America, what are your favorite racetrack experiences here? I mean, like for me, I love Saratoga and I love Del Mar. I've never done Keeneland before, but what do you enjoy the most about the domestic racing scene?
Well, there's some that are really unique. I mean, my favorite place to spend a day is definitely Saratoga. It's a old-fashioned wooden structure. They are modernizing a lot of it, and they're obstructing a lot of the views. And I hope it's not going to change the charm of the place. But it's a great place to go. You can't beat the atmosphere. The competition is terrific. The food is good. You see all your friends all the time. When you go out to dinner at night, you see people you know. There's hardly anything like that in the United States. So that would be number one on my list. Keeneland, I would say, is kind of like going to the Masters, the layout, the facilities, the ambiance, the graciousness. I mean, when you walk through doors at Keeneland, there's 2 guys wearing green jackets opening the door for you. You never open the door. The food is phenomenal. There's sort of a bit of a Southern charm to it. Santa Anita is basically my old home base. I worked there, I raced there, I wrote there. I know every square inch of that property. I basically got my bones there, and I love that place. Fortunately, they haven't changed it too much. They did add one gigantic dining room, which is better than what they used to have, but I love that place. Those are my favorite places, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about one of your horses, one of your big horses, and I believe your only Kentucky Derby winner was Animal Kingdom, and I want you to talk a little bit about him because we didn't mention Pimlico Racetrack, which it's got a lot of charm as well, even though it's not in the nicest part of Baltimore. But I want you to talk a little bit about Animal Kingdom. A little bit about his journey. It was an amazing campaign that you waged with him, because you won big races with him, and too many times in our game, horses like Animal Kingdom, they win a big race, they get hurt, and they go right to the breeding shed, and we never hear from them again. Whether or not they're going to be good stallions, we don't even know, but we just take a shot at it. That's the way the game is played. But you guys kept campaigning this horse, and he had a couple of serious injuries, but you took really good care of him. And he did eventually make it to the breeding shed, but not before he gave us, a great career. So why don't you describe Animal Kingdom's career a little bit to us, and tell us how you bought him and where he went from there.
Okay. Well, the reason that I didn't stop on him, and we had good offers, is I was, I want to make money, obviously, but I'm not in this to make money. There's other ways and other things I could have done in life to have made considerably more money than the money I've made in the horse business. I do it because I love it. I like the challenge of it, the sporting aspect of it. And I want to see how much a horse has got in the tank. And that horse got stopped a couple of times from accidents and injury. And I wanted to keep him going because I wanted to see how good he was. I knew we could always get some money for him. And it was a gamble, because if he didn't go on and train well, we would have left, X number of millions on the table. But so how Animal Kingdom came into being, another one of my little international ventures, I bought a mare in Germany. She was gorgeous. I saw a picture of her. I saw videos of her racing. She came up with public auction, and I thought it was a legitimate sale because the people that had her were liquidating everything. And I bought her in Germany for about $400,000. It was the highest price ever paid for a filly or mare in training in Germany at that time. We brought her to California. She trained great, but she had a wind problem and she couldn't reproduce her morning speed in the afternoon. So we retired her, and then we got ready to breed her. And when it came time to breed her, I chose King Mambo as the horse to breed her to. And he was a little iffy that season. He had a bad back, and they had to dig a hole in the ground so he could reach the mares. You know, they had to put the mares in there so he wouldn't have to lean over too far. And anyway, he went what they said was offline. He was unable to breed. So a horse that I bought for one of my partners named Lawad de Sanamo, who was a champion from Brazil, was standing at the same place, and we needed to make a quick decision. I looked at the pedigree, they matched up fine. And so we bred the mare to that horse, and there we got Animal Kingdom. So I had a group of people in the breeding partnership that owned them. We put them in the sale at Keeneland, and I bought them back myself for $100,000, formed a syndicate, and we started, we put him in training, and we went from there. When he was a yearling, he was on the taller side, narrow, not that imposing of an individual. I would say that he was slightly above average in looks and conformation. I put him in training with Wayne Catalano. Before the horse ever ran, he worked unbelievably from the gate, 46 or 45 and 4, something like that. I mean, unbelievable speed for a horse his size. He ran 2 times at 2. He ran second the first time in Arlington going along. And then we brought him to Keeneland, and he won very impressively, going 1 mile and an eighth. And I had people come up to me right after that and tell me he was their Derby horse, just off that maiden win. I switched trainers when I hired Graham Motion as my private trainer. And we gave the horse to Graham, sent the horse to Florida for a month, little vacation. And when he came back, just after being on the farm for a month, he went from being just a normal looking horse to the Incredible Hulk. You would have thought we had juiced him with steroids. I mean, he bulked up like he couldn't believe. We ran him once, going 1 mile on turf just as an opener. He ran second. We brought him to Turfway. He won the Spiral very impressively. We decided to probably run him in the Derby, but he had never been on the dirt. And no horse had ever won the Derby that had ever raced on the dirt. So we decided to breeze him the week before the Derby, watch the move. We had Robbie Alvarado up. We wanted to hear what he thought, whether the horse could handle the dirt. And the horse turned in a mind-blowing workout. And Baffert came up to me later and said, "You're going to win the Derby. You got the horse." And sure enough, we won the Derby. After that, I did not bet him, by the way. My wife bet him. I thought he had a shot. But, you know, when you think about the Derby all of your adult life, you don't really ever think you're going to win it. You hope you're going to win it, but you never really. I mean, I've seen great favorites, Holy Bull, some fantastic horses that couldn't do it. So why would my horse that I bred be any different? But so when he won, I was pretty shocked, to tell you the truth. After that, he ran second in the Preakness. He got wiped out in the Belmont when a jockey lost his mind and decided to veer sharply out of the gate to pick on a guy that he had a grudge with. Our horse got hurt a hawk. We were able to bring him back, and then he had another setback. And so once we got him back, I told Motion, I said, "Look," I said, "we've got several months. Let's shoot for the World Cup." And that's what we did, and it worked in our favor.
Yeah, that was an amazing journey. Well, how about one of your favorite European horses, and maybe one that we don't know much about that you did really well with and won a couple of big races?
Well, we have a horse over there now, a filly named La Petite Cocoa, that she's typical of what's been happening with my stable the last couple of years. So I bought her for not a lot of money. We offered her for about $240,000, I think it was. and it landed like a thud with my clients, and I got stuck with 25% of it. And she's done nothing but win. She beat a filly last year in a Group 2 called Love, who had won the both Oaks the year before and was the champion. We beat her in a Group 2. We were favored to win a Group 1 at Ascot in the British Champions, it's called, just before the Breeders' Cup, where we were going to bring her. And she twisted a hock and a hind leg a week before that. So we had to stop on her for the rest of the year. So this year, she's 4 years old. Right now, she's the highest rated older filly or mare in Ireland. And we're going to point her this year for the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. She's got a decent pedigree. The reason why people didn't like her, they didn't like the pedigree and they thought the price was too cheap. Same thing happened to me last year with another filly that I got stuck with. I own 30% of her because nobody liked her pedigree and they thought her price was too cheap. So she wound up beating older males as a 3-year-old filly in a stakes race in August last year. So that's it. I would like to say this about Captain Bodgit that you referenced earlier. Of all horses I've owned, he was far and away my favorite. When we bought him, I tried to buy him as a 2-year-old from the woman that owned it. I think her name was Phyllis Susini. Her husband was a trainer, and he was a fantastic 2-year-old in Maryland. Won the Laurel Futurity, won 6 races.
I believe Stuart Mitchell. Was Stuart Mitchell the trainer of Captain Bodgit? Not. Yeah.
It was always Gary Capuano, but she had been married.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, but he died. She was the widow. Yeah. And I couldn't get anywhere with her. So when the horse came out in the Holy Bull in his first start at 3, he wasn't ready. He was a very big, heavy body horse. And the horse got beat decisively. So I went in there and I offered $500,000, and the agent didn't even want to present the offer because she turned down $1.5 million. And I said, look, it's a different year. It's a different story. Just go make the offer. So he made the offer, and sure enough, she accepted it. So I sent a guy, a very infamous, notorious vet, who's the most brilliant vet I've ever known or even heard of, but he had a streak of larceny in him. Got him in a lot of trouble, including giving butazolidine to Dancer's Image before he won the Kentucky Derby. Alex Harthill was his name, but he was a brilliant guy, and I sent him down there. He spent 4 days there looking at the horse, watching him train, called me up and said, do you mind if I bring a consultant in? I said, no. So he brings a consultant in. A guy was a professor named Jerry Johnson. And so the horse had an old bowed tendon. And we researched it and found out that how he'd injured the tendon was when he was on an electric hot walking machine in Ocala while he was in early training. He reared up, caught a leg over the rubber part of the machine and put a crease in it. Harthill, we x-rayed it, we scanned it, ultrasounded it, did everything you could. And he watched the horse. He says, you have to come down here and watch this horse train. Never seen anything like it. Okay. And here's a guy that treated practically every Kentucky Derby winner from the time he worked for Calumet Farm in the late 40s up until that point, which was 1997. So I went down there, I watched this horse train. The horse galloped 1 3/4 miles and then breezed the last 1/4 mile. And I turned to Harthill and I said, I wonder why he did that. And he goes, he's done it every day since I've been here. He says, I haven't seen a horse that could train like this since Citation. He said, this horse is unbelievable. So even though the horse had a tendon and nobody else would consider buying him, we bit the bullet and did it. And we won the Florida Derby. We won the Wood Memorial. He came within a head of winning the Derby. And probably if we had a different rider on, we would have won the Derby. He was making the winning move. And Gary Stevens, who was on Silver Charm, that won it, pulled what I call a Bill Shoemaker by moving slightly over to his right, just enough the path he took of our horse that had caused our horse a loss of momentum, and he wound up getting beat ahead. So then he ran in the Preakness, got beat a neck in a 3-horse photo, came out of the race with another tendon that was iffy, and we retired him. But I love that horse. He was the most powerful looking specimen we have ever had. And he literally was like a machine.
Yeah, he was a great horse, and that was just a great Triple Crown series. I did have one question for you about Team Valor that I wanted to ask. I forgot to ask. When you have happy investors, what are the things that they say about Team Valor that they said was missing in some of the other investment structures they've been involved in?
Well, I think the one thing everybody would agree on is this. Unless it's your own child in an athletic event, there's not much that anybody has experienced in the horse business that compares with watching your horse in your colors, whether it's your own personal colors or your stable colors, go to the lead down the stretch and win a race. It is just such an unbelievable feeling of exhilaration that once you experience that, there's nothing else that you can find that will match it or act as a substitute. And that's why people that are in it and leave for a while, that's what always brings them back. And that's what gets them hooked. If you're a horse owner and you can win 1 of 5 races, you're considered to be extremely successful. So that means you're losing 4 of every 5 times. Anything you do in life where you're losing 4 out of every 5 times isn't going to give you a whole lot of satisfaction. But when you win a race, it is so great. The feeling lasts. I mean, usually you win a race, you're going to feel fantastic for about 5 to 7 days. And up to 2 weeks, you're still going to retain that glow. And it's something that gives people a chance to have something to look forward to. And I think that's why they do it. And they can't find anything else that gives them that same kind of satisfaction. I used to run track. I know what the feeling was like to win a race or win a high jump competition. And that pales in comparison to the feeling you get winning any race.
Yeah. Well, that's great, Barry. Well, look, this has been awesome. I love listening to your stories. And you've done so many amazing things in the game, and you're a true risk taker, and you've been able to have this amazing career at what some would consider a very risky sport, and you've won some big races. I don't know if you have any final comments, but I've really enjoyed talking to you, and hopefully at some point we can get on and do it again, and we can hear more of your stories.
Great. Good to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. Have a good day.
Okay.